So I want to talk a little bit about Gabby Petito's disappearance and death, and I want to share some thoughts with you guys that I've been reflecting on, that I've been thinking on. I hope you find them useful. I'm sure I don't need to get into details of this. You can Google it. There's loads of publications all over YouTube and the internet about this girl. But I wrote down some things on this that I was been thinking about. I don't know whether you agree with me on these or not, but I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. So comment below. So the first thing that I wrote down here is don't be jealous of the facade. When you read the publications, as far as we can tell, about this couple, about Gabby, it becomes very apparent to you that the perception which was portrayed online and to other people of Gabby and the relationship she had with her fiance is not what was the reality. You know, so many of us, we become jealous of other people. We aspire to be like other people. We're like, oh my God, they're so happy. Oh my God, they're so wonderful. But the reality of life is there's decay on the inside. What looks pretty on the outside is dead on the inside the majority of the time, right? And so I would stop being so envious. You know, my sisters said something to me that I'll never forget. They said that comparison is a thief of all joy. And so many of us, particularly women, spend their lives being jealous of other couples, of other people and what they're having. So many of us we are jealous of people who have a lot of money, who have a lot of success. But most of us don't realize that there is a price that has to be paid for having massive success, for happiness. In fact, one of the things that I share with people is that everything has a price. Not to think so is naive. And so many of us in life, we are under the illusion that if something looks great on the outside, and we believe it, this isn't like something that we're like, yeah, but Kasim, I know what you're saying, but it's not really true. No. Most of us are under this illusion. Most of us genuinely believe this to be the truth. Because look at our lives, right? Many of us don't realize that we see a tip of the iceberg, right? Success leaves clues, meaning that usually when we see something at the end, there has been a load of other things that have happened along the way. You know, I've spent a lot of time interviewing couples who've been married for 15 years or more. And one of the funny things that I found interesting is that when I interview these couples, I sit in their living room. Most of the time, I'm like, oh my God, but you guys have been married for so long. But then they usually abruptly interrupt me and say, well, Kasim, you don't remember the first year of our marriage. Well, Cass, you don't remember around the 10-year mark, right? Because I am seeing the end product of them being together for 15 years, but I haven't seen all the other things along the way. And so one of the things that I've learned is how good people are at hiding things from other people. How good we as people are from anything that would allow us to be shamed, that would allow us to be ridiculed, that would allow us to be judged. Most of us hide them. Most of us put them away. And so we end up isolating ourselves, which makes the whole situation worse. Because, I mean, you look at that relationship with Gabby and her fiance, and you just think, how can your life be so perfect if you look online and yet there's loads of people talking about you fighting, talking about domestic violence and all of these things. And you think, didn't nobody know? Didn't you seek help? And the reality is no, she didn't seek help. She didn't share her truth with anyone. So I guess one of the first things that I really want to share with you is share your truth. Don't spend your life in the shadows at the risk of being judged, at the risk of being ridiculed. Because the reality of life is that part of the reason why Gabby's story has caught national attention is because a lot of people resonate with the story. A lot of people understand that they too have gone through domestic abuse. They too, everything has looked perfect on the outside, but in reality, everything has been terrible on the inside. In their home, everything is decaying. There's arguments, there is abuse, there is neglect, right? There's shaming. There is all of these things that are happening on the inside, and yet nobody knows. And I would share with you, step out of the shadows and into the light. And yes, you may get judged. But you will be surprised at how many people are going through the very same thing that you're going through. It's shocking. It is shocking. You know, if you don't believe me, speak to anybody that you know and ask them if they know anyone who's been through an abusive relationship, or if they themselves know somebody who's been through an abusive relationship. Because the reality of life is all of us know somebody. And yet there are these dark, shadowy, gloomy aspects of life that really are the essence of life, and yet most of us hide them. Most of us pretend that they don't exist. And those are the life. Those messy, ugly parts of humanity are what make up humanity. So that's the first thing that I wanted to share with you. The second thing that I wanted to share with you is really about the media and distortion and perception. It's interesting to note that there's something called the white woman syndrome. I'm sure you've heard of this. What it basically means is that the news typically tend to focus on women who've gone missing, who are typically white, blonde, young, and pretty. Which goes to show the very thing that I've tried to articulate to many of you, which is that don't believe the news. Don't believe anything that you see on the news, because it is simply a perception of the truth. The news has one job ultimately, which is to make money. Every company that exists, their first and fundamental principle that in order for it to function is that it has to make money. And so part of this is that there is this systemic system which does not actually allow for truth to be truly shared in the way that it should be shared, because the truth really doesn't sell. And part of that is we have to look at us as humans and realize that actually most of us don't want to know the truth. Most of us don't want to know the truth. Most of us will just accept whatever is easiest to accept. You know, I was in a taxi today and I was talking to a taxi driver, and one of the things we were talking about is Iran. And we were talking about the fact that in Iran there are beautiful mountains. There's beautiful people who are honest, people who are hardworking. Yet the perception that we have been shown by the media, by social media, by the news, by news outlets, is that Iran is is full of these kind of terrorists, and is full of these vicious people who are all deadly, who are all would kill you, who are all extremists. But the reality of life is that most people are not like that. Iran is beautiful. There is beautiful mountains in Iran, right? The culture in itself is beautiful. The seas are wonderful. And so if you simply take the information that you've been given by the media and you take it as default, you're never really going to see reality as it exists. You're going to be given a perception of the truth. And the thing that you have to understand is that the media is being controlled by people who have different agendas. One of those is the government, as we all know, right? We know it for a fact. It isn't something that we have to debate. We know that the government has to have some level of control over the media, because if they don't, anything can be published by the media, right? And we know that part of what keeps a country running and fundamentally operating is order, law and order. And if you allow newspapers to just and news outlets to simply produce the truth, to show what actually exists in its raw form, you'd have fear, you'd have panic. The world would be in chaos, right? So part of it is that the government have to, in some ways, filter what is published. So that means that there are people who have agendas that are not in your best interest, meaning that your best interest is to be shown the truth, is to be somebody to be transparent with you. But the reality of life is that's not how it works, right? In fact, most of us, let me go back. When I went through counseling, and I'm training to become a counselor, one of the things that they tell you is that when you are coaching somebody, you have to be really careful not to give them the answers to the problems that they need. Of course, you as a counselor know what the issue is and you know how to solve it. But you have to sit back and allow the person to find the truth for themselves. Because if you don't sit back and allow them to find the truth for themselves, most people back away. That it's too much. The truth is simply too much for most people to handle. So they will back away and not come back to therapy. And that just really goes to show you the level of denial that most of us live our lives in. Most of us, we don't really want to know the truth. We think we do. And so for you, what I'd recommend to you, and it's something that I'm practicing myself, is really trying to see the truth as it exists. Looking at my prejudices, looking at my preferences, looking at anything that is distorting the truth from me seeing it, and from me seeing the truth as it actually exists. So that's the second thing. The third thing that I want to share with you is that this has really shown me, this case with Gabby has really shown me where loyalty lies. So if you've been following the case, you will know that Gabby's fiance's parents, it seems, have not contacted Gabby's parents since her disappearance. That may be to protect their son, for whatever. We don't know what the reason is. But it's really just going to show me, and I wrote down something here, which is, I wrote down that 10% should always be held back for yourself. You know, I regard loyalty very highly, and I'm sure you regard loyalty very highly, but I think it's really important for us all to get that whilst we need to be loyal and we need to give of ourselves, there should always be a certain percentage of ourselves that we keep for us. You know, one of the things that I'm writing this book about lessons I've learned till I was 30, and one of the lessons that I talk about in that book is never make anything everything. And what I mean in that book, or by that principle or that key, is that you really don't want to make anything ever anything, because if you do, you become subject to that thing. So for example, if you're a woman and you are in a relationship, you should always be in a position where you can go back to work. And if you're not able to go back to work, you should be able to be educated to such a degree that if you were to break up with somebody, let's say you're with a husband or with a boy and he's paying for you most of the time, you should be able to be in a position where you should be able to be able to go back to work were you to break up. What tends to happen is, and is something that I'm really paying close attention to, is that so many of us, including myself, we end up putting ourselves in positions where we end up being used, essentially. We give too much, and it is possible to give too much, and it's something that you want to think about, whether you are somebody who gives too much, because a lot of the time, if you give too much, it actually lowers the value of what you're giving, because, well, if I can just get it any time and I can just get it anywhere and it's really easy to get, why would I pay more for it? Why would I value it? And part of that is understanding value. You know, one of the big lessons I've learned in my life is yes, it's one thing to be a hard worker, and yes, it's one thing to work hard, but something has to be said for marketing, something has to be said for leadership, something has to be said for sales. Right? It isn't good enough to just simply be really good at be a really hard worker. Working hard is an aspect and a key of life and success, but it's one aspect. And so what I would share with you is, of course, it is good to be loyal. Of course, it is good to give of yourself, but you also have to put barriers in place, knowing that malevolence exists, knowing that there is that even though the person loves you, even though there are great people out there, some people will abuse power. Some people will abuse your friendship. Some people will abuse your love. They will abuse it. This doesn't mean that you then go completely at the opposite side and say, I'm never going to be loved, I'm never going to get into a relationship. It just means you have to pay attention and keep a certain eye out for danger. Right? Where I think so many of us, we get into relationships and we get into interactions and agreements with things, but we don't realize that there is a potential for danger. We lock ourselves into these situations where we just don't realize we get into a relationship, we have no way out of the relationship because we've given absolutely everything. And a lot of the time, you are supposed to give absolutely everything, but the key to it is in spurts. You're supposed to give absolutely everything in spurts, then back away. you're supposed to then refill yourself, go back in. But what happens is, if you keep giving and keep giving, keep giving and keep giving, you won't even pay attention to the signs, the danger. So that's really what I wanted to share with you. I don't know whether it has made any sense or it's been useful for you or not, but I hope it has, and I hope it's added some value to the quality of your life. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll speak to you soon. What do you think, by the way? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Comment below. Thanks. Bye.